Good afternoon, guys. My name is Zsolt Pelyhe, and I was working in Vaadin 14 in the past 6 months. And I thought I would share my ideas and also my experience from the past 6 months. So I hope you will enjoy that, and let's get started. So I created a short website, and through this website, I would like to introduce you to Vaadin, how it works, and what are the benefits of Vaadin. This is just a short introduction. It's not a real deep one. So I hope also beginners can understand this, not only advanced learners. So first topic we'll have is actually the REST service, calling a REST service by using Json. And the second one is calling a REST service using a DTO. A DTO is actually a data transfer object. So we call it data transfer object in Java, and in a short way we can call it DTO. And the third part is calling a REST service using in an asynchronous way with a DTO, because this part will show you how to call it in a synchronous way, not an asynchronous way. This one is focusing on the asynchronous way. And the last topic we have is the form and how forms work, and actually how we can send a form to the backend. I had about 6 months ago another course introducing you to Java and also Angular. So the technology was there Angular, and this is Vaadin. Both are good for front end, right? So either you use Vaadin or you use Angular, you will do front end programming. So let's see a little bit what is the difference between Angular and Vaadin and how it works. So now we are dealing with Java Vaadin 14, and earlier we used Angular 2 in the other course. So if you search on YouTube, then you can type in my name, Zsolt Pelyhe, and basically you will find my material there. So there is another technology called React. We didn't really cover this, and we will not. So, but we will talk about Java Vaadin. Vaadin has a few advantages, I guess. So, and I put together the advantages Vaadin have compared to Angular, for example, or the other technologies. So whoever is a Java programmer, he doesn't need to learn another technology, because Angular is completely different. So it works completely different from Java, and you don't have to pick this up. The second one is Vaadin creates the non-Java elements automatically. In Vaadin, there are also non-Java elements, but when you compile the code, basically the front-end elements, which are not Java elements, will be created automatically. You don't have to take care of that. Vaadin is pretty logical, so you will see the code is logical and it's easy to deploy. So actually the code is easy to implement. So whoever knows Java, also the front-end side is very easy to implement. And the last one is basically earlier we could also create front-end with Java. So we use the Java server face and the Java server page for front-end, but now this is completely different. We use here Vaadin. So the server face and the server page, they have nothing to do with Vaadin actually. So that's a separate thing. So that's what I wanted to summarize here, just to understand what we are going to talk about. And here, in my PowerPoint, actually, I put here also a few stuffs which are important to know. We will send elements from the backend to the front end. And the question is, how do we send elements from the backend to the front end? Basically, we can do it in a synchronous way, or we can do it in an asynchronous way. What is the difference between a synchronous or asynchronous way? Synchronous means basically, so when you send something or you have a code, you know, in the code, always the step before has to be finished so that the step next can happen. That means we have to wait till one action will end, and then once this action ended, then we can start with the next action, right? Asynchronous means we don't have to wait for the action before, but we can do different actions parallel. So no need to wait. So it's an unblocking, actually unblocking action. That means nothing blocks the action because of the former actions. And the next question is, what do we send from the backend to the front end? Will we send a JSON node or a data transfer object? That's the second question. So you will see in the code what's the difference between a JSON node or data transfer object. So okay, that was the very short summary I had to tell you. And now let me tell you that the other code created a backend. So the backend looks like this, and now we will not talk about this, just to show you what's going on here. So this is an endpoint. The endpoint is actually all users / all users, and the host is the 8080. So the endpoint is running on that, and here is the JSON representation of the backend elements. So that's how we receive the elements from the backend in a JSON format, right? That's, for example, here is the ID and the name of the first user and the address and basically the email address. So that is the first object here in a JSON format, right? And then here comes the next one. So that's what we are going to use here in the front-end development. So now let's go into the code and let's see what's happening here, how we put this together. So don't forget that when we create the front end, it is a Java project. So I called it demo frontend. So this is a Java project I created in the Spring Boot initializer. So if you go to start.spring.io, here you have the chance to create a brand new project, a brand new Spring Boot Java project. Here you can click on the versions you would like to choose, and at the end you click on generate, and then you can download the Spring Boot, the Java Spring Boot project, and you can import it in Eclipse. That's how I did that. And once it was imported, you can click on the demo front-end application, and you see this is the front-end application. So this is the place where you can start your Spring Boot application from. And these files below here, these are the files I added so that we can see this home page. And once you see the home page, let's see what's going to happen here. So let's go on step by step. So first of all, here's a short icon. If you click on the icon, you will see the different files, the views we have. So here are the views, and whenever I click on the view, I can jump directly to the view. This is running on localhost 9090 because the backend is running on the 8080. So I cannot put the front end and the backend on the same port. They have to be in different ports, because otherwise it wouldn't work if they would be on the same port. Right. So, okay. So now I can close this and then click on the first link. Let's see what's happening here. So calling a REST service using a JSON for results. So what's happening is here is a grid, and this is the grid header. And when I click on the fetch all post button, then in the table you will see the different data coming from the backend. These are these data you saw in the JSON before, but in a very nice way. Actually, it's going to be organized in a grid. So all it can do is basically we click on the fetch all post button, and then you see the data. So if we get back, let's see that to the home page and you click on the second link, calling REST service using a DTO. So here we use DTO instead of a JSON. Okay, so I'll click on it and then you'll see the same thing happens. Basically, you can see the data here in the grid below. You have some buttons, create a new user, update a current user, or delete a user. And also you can sort the different users. Let me check if it works fine. So if I want to sort them based on the name, I click on the name and it should be sorted. So that's a kind of option here in the grid. So okay, so let's see the next one. So when we check out the home page again, then we can see calling a REST service using an asynchron with DTO. So the same thing happens here. When I click on the fetch all comments, then the comments will come in and you will see the same data coming from the backend we saw before. And the last one, so when I click on it, these are the different forms, right? So for instance, if we want to create a new user, we have to fill out this form and then submit the new user, or we can cancel it, right? So okay, let me get back there. And now, of course, we want to check out the code, how it works, and then we will get deeper into this. So let's see the first code part. This is the data. So it's a package. I called it com.example.demofrontend.data. And I created a service, a front-end service, so that we can call the API. So what is the API? I call API this endpoint, right? This is what I call API. So this should be called actually from the front-end service, because if we don't call it, the front end will never know what data is used. So let me show you how it's achieved or how it is implemented. So I created more services. The first one is the asynchronous REST service. So don't forget, you can implement it in different ways, either synchronous or asynchronous. This is the asynchronous. So if I click on that, here is the implementation of the asynchronous service. So actually in the asynchronous service, this is a Java file which implements an interface which is called serializable. So this is very important that it is here. And then after that, basically here we are using the asynchronous callback. This is very important, because this will happen in an asynchronous way so that the former action will not block the current action which is coming after. So, and then I create a method. The method is called getAllCommentsAsynchronous. This is up to you how you call the method, right? In Java, you can call it anything you like. This is how I called it. And this has a parameter. The parameter is actually a callback function. And the type of this is user DTO. So what we pass in is actually the user DTO. It's not a JSON node. So a user data transfer object. What is a user data transfer object? Here, if I click on it, you will see user DTO looks like this. So we have a Java class, I called it user DTO. It has these properties, so the four properties, an integer, string, string, string. So actually these are variables, different variables. And then we have getters. So the getters we need because we want to get this data, and we have the setters because we want to set this data. If I don't want to write these things one by one, actually I could use the long block in Java. So and then with long block you don't need to write explicitly the get and the setters. So we have the get name, the set name, the get address, and the set address. That's how we can set these different variables here in this class. And finally, actually these are not so important here, so you don't have to take care about those. But the most important thing is you understand how you get the different variables and how you set the different variables. So that's how I created the user DTO. I have a new user DTO. There's only one difference between the user DTO and the new user DTO is the ID. Because here in the user DTO, we need an ID. Why? Because we get this data from the backend. And when we get this data from the backend, it already has an ID, right? Because it comes from the database. But when we go into the new user, you see, we don't have an ID field because we don't need an ID. I mean, when you want to create a new user and you will send it to the backend, the database automatically gives it an ID. That's why I don't put any ID here. The rest looks like the same, like here in the user DTO. Basically, so the only difference is this ID. The ID is missing from the new user because the database will give it a new ID automatically. That's why. Okay, so coming back here to the REST service in an asynchronous way, what's happening here? Here is our function, and here is the signature of the function. So that's the parameter, which is a callback function. And here I just put something in the console so that when it's working, I can see the console. It's fetching all comments through the REST. And here an important step happens. I create a web client, and in the web client I must give in the URI, which is the localhost 8080 users. As you saw before, here's localhost 8080 all users. So that's where actually the data is coming from. So that's all users. So here's the endpoint. I have to pass in the endpoint right here when I create this web client. And then what's the next step? I can retrieve the data to an entity list, and I use the user DTO. So I am doing it with the user DTO, not with the JSON node. And like in Angular with observables, I have to subscribe to that. So I subscribe, and here in the result, I will get the comments by getting the body of the results. So what do I call comments? Comments I call here in the backend. For example, let's call it one comment. It's actually one record from the backend. I call it here comments, right? So I get the comments, I get the records from the backend. How? I have to subscribe, and in the result, I get these comments from the backend, the data from the backend. And then I put a message in the console, and basically I use the callback.operation finished comments, and that's all. And what's happening? So with this function, when I call this function, basically I am bringing the data from the backend to the front end. That's what I am doing right here. Okay, so that's easy to understand basically. So that's happening here in an asynchronous way, in a non-blocking way. I can do the same in a synchronous way, which is a blocking way. Let's see that. So if I click on the Frontend Service Java, here in the Frontend Service Java, I am saying I'm getting the data with a DTO. So it's the same like here, because here I used DTO as well, but in an asynchronous way. Here I'm going to use in a synchronous way. So actually I am using the server port so that it understands which server port needs to be used. Where is the server port? The server port is right here in the application properties. So if you come here, you can see the server port is the 9090. Here is where we can set the server port. This is commented out, so I use this way as a variable. Okay, so when I come back here, then there is a string variable, and it's annotated with a server port, right? And don't forget, this is a service, so we have to notify the system that that's going to be a service, a front-end service. Okay, let's see what this function can do. So I create a function, and the return value of this function is a list, and the list is type of user DTO. And the function has no parameters. This is only the return value, what I'm using here. I put this message in the console, and here what's happening, I use the web client again with the create web client and pass in the endpoint name, right? And then after that, what's happening, then I want to get the users. Before I call them comments, now I call it users. And then the return value is a list of user DTO, and I am calling the spec.retrieve to entity list user class.block.getBody. So from the JSON, actually I get all the users in a DTO format. And I put actually here this message into the console and then return the users what I get here. Okay, I hope you understood it. And then you can see the difference between the asynchronous DTO format and the synchronous DTO format. So that's how we can get the data from the backend with the DTO in a synchronous way. Okay, and the next one is when we want to get the data with JSON node. So that's a different type. It's not a DTO like here, but like a JSON node. So if I want to get it in a JSON node, I have to call the getAllPost method. So here I don't use any parameter either, and the return value is a list and the JSON node. Here I put this message into the console, and then I have to use here also the web client, create a web client, and then once I use that, it is, look here, it's quite similar to that one, right? It's quite similar. The only difference what you see here is before that here when you use the spec, right? Because here we use the spec as well, and we pass that in. Below the spec, here we use the JSON node. Let's see what we are using here. We are using here spec.retrieve to entity integer class, because here we get back the fetch count, for example, and here with the JSON node we use the JSON node list. So that's the basic difference here, because if you see here, we got the list user DTO, and here we got the list JSON node. That's a big difference, right? So you use another format here in the JSON node class. Okay, and basically we return the post, and that's all. So we see here two different ways. First, with getting the data from the backend with the DTO, and here second, we get the data in a JSON node format. And then I showed you before this fetch count, so I will count how many data I get from the backend. So what we need to do is we use another server endpoint. This is the /count. Let me try if it works. So if we get here and we say localhost 8080, so localhost 8080 and let me check again. We say localhost 8080, that's the server port, /count. Okay, what was the server port? Let me check. 1990. Okay, let's check. Count No, let me check the other one. Localhost 9090 count. Nothing. Okay, in this case, because we have to work, so let me get back there and then check again. That's the front-end service, and you say server port. Yeah, just one sec. Open declaration, string server port. Right, server port is 8080. Okay, that's very strange because it should actually we should get the the count if you use this localhost 8080/count. That should work. Oh, let me check again. Localhost 8080/ okay, it's not working. All users localhost 8080 should work. The application is no okay. This is no mapping. Probably the backend didn't get this count because this is just a trial program. So in the controller and the backend, I didn't implement that. That's why we don't see this right here. So I have to check it. But okay, let's get back to here. Okay, and then let's see further. So that's how we have to implement the get count, but probably it's not working now because I didn't implement it in the controller on the backend side. As I told you, this backend is a backend created for the course before, and here the most important stuff is that the data appear, right? So not the count. The count means it counts how many records will be brought from the backend. That's how you can implement it. But in order for you to work, actually you have to implement it also in the controller on the backend side. But this course is only about the front end, so we don't get into the backend right now. Okay, let's see the next one, the creating the REST post call, right? How we create a post call and what is a post call. A post call is when we send data to the backend. So that means a user is filling out the form and wants to send to the database. That's how we can create it. So here is the the web client as a bean, and then return the web client.create. And once we have the default web client, here we create it, and then we call the store function. I called it a store function. The return value is JSON node, and I pass in the new user DTO. And of course, there are exceptions here, so you have to handle the exceptions here, right? This is important to handle the exceptions. Here's the system out print line. So you put a message in the console, and then you use an object mapper. You have to use an object mapper because here, as you see, we use the new user DTO. So it must be mapped with the JSON. That's why we are using the object mapper. And here is the, the mapper, and the mapper function we are calling the right value as string. Once it's called, then actually it should work with these things I put right here. So this is the return value, and this should work after that. And here is this was then the post call. I mean, when we put a new data into database. And here is the put call when we want to update a data in the database. It is very similar. So what you have to do is you have to update. I mean, you use the update function, and then you put the parameter in it, and this is the return value right here. Okay, and you have to, of course, put the different exceptions here after the throws, and here you just create a message into the console, and then you are using an object mapper because it must map the DTO with the JSON, and then you use the endpoint as a URI and all these stuff. This is a return value, and it must work, right? And the last one is the delete. When we want to delete something, basically you have to use this one. Also create a function. I call it delete. I must pass in a parameter. The parameter is an integer. That is the ID of the record we want to delete. And the same way, you have to create the exceptions. Once you created the exceptions, actually you don't have to map here anything because it's just a simple deletion. That's why these two lines are commented out, and the return value is this. That's how we delete with this function. And then here I have a service exception function. Actually, that's for the exceptions. So, and for the exception message. Okay, that's our front-end service. So the front-end service is very important in order for us to create the connection between the backend and the front-end. So we are bringing the data from the backend, we are sending the data, and we are deleting from the backend. Let me check if it's working now, what we implemented here. So let's get here into the Vaadin frontend. And let's see if it is working. So the first one, we are fetching the data. Okay, so that's the get one. So here, if you get back, fetching the data, it means we are getting the data. So this one, okay, we are getting the data. So let's check. So I am using the DTO one. So look, we are getting the data here in the grid, right? So getting is working fine. Now, let me check if we can create a new user. Create new user, and let's write Yola is the name. Address is Berlin, and email is yola@yahoo.com. Submit new user. Look, the data is saved. Welcome to Yola. And let's see if Yola is there. Yes, Yola is right here. It's the 24th. That's the ID, and Yola is in Berlin, and here is the email address. So this data was saved in the database, and the application is bringing it from the database. Let me check on the backend side here. Let's refresh, and let's see. Look, Yola is here, right? It's coming from the backend, so the JSON is providing this data for us. Okay, now let's see the next one. I want to update this Yola, so I will highlight it and I say update user, and this one is blurred because I should not be able to change the ID, only the rest of those. And let's say I put an S here, Yolas, called Yolas. So I will correct the email address and I say update user. I will update the user. Look, data is saved. Look, Yolas and Yolas. So that was changed. So if you refresh also the JSON, you can see that this information was updated right here. Okay, that was great. Okay, what else? Let's see. So if I get back and I want to delete this Yolas, right? So what's happening, I will highlight this row and I say delete user. And when I delete this user, I should get back to the table, and you see Yolas is not here anymore. So it's missing, so it was deleted from the database. So if I come back and I will refresh, I don't see this record anymore. So it's gone. Okay, so all the CRUD operations work between the backend and the front. We implemented this in Java. So not in a different technology, but in Java. So I showed you only the services. Okay, now let me show you the front end, how it looks like, because these were only the services and the data transfer objects. So in the front end, which is very important for you to see, this one, I mean, when I come back here, I want to go to home. This is the home side, right? So let me check in the code. So if we come to the code and we say home, it is very easy. So there is a route. The route is the default value is the empty value. That means that's the home side. That's how we represent the home side, with the empty value here. That's only a space here inside the quotation marks. And the layout is why it looks like this, because of the layout. We add the layout to that. So I called it main layout. We'll check the layout later. So and what's happening? This is a Java class called home, which extends the main, right? And here I add the links. So the links are added right here. This is a new paragraph, and then I use a span here, you see, and then I put an anchor with the link, okay? And then here's the second one. Look, that's a H2 with the router link, right? With the router link, and that's what I created, calling the REST service using JSON for results. Let me check. So this was the anchor, right? So the anchor was, when I click on the anchor, it will jump to the REST example, Vaadin REST example. So let's check here. You see, we put in the anchor this one, that's why it's jumping there. Okay, here's the here. And then below in the sections, you can see these are already router links instead of anchor. I'm using the router links. And in the router links, I put the text here and the name of the Java file I have created, where the JSON view is. So you have to use this way. And then the first example uses JSON approach that I have created on the backend. Let me check. So let's get back here. And look, here's calling the REST service using a DTO class for results. Calling the REST service using the JSON for results. Here, this is what you see here, and the first example, that here, the first example in the paragraph, right? So the paragraph is below and the router link is above. That's how you can put router links and jump to the next website. You put the name of the Java class here, and then you can jump onto that. And here are the rest of the links. So that's a very easy Java file. So it's absolutely not difficult. So that's how you can jump to the next site with the help of this router link and also the names of the Java files. Okay, what's the next step? So let's get back. Click on that. You see, here you can see this icon, and you can see the title, you can see a button, and then you can see the headers for the grid. And then once you click on the button, then the different data come in under the headers. How did I do that? So that's also very easy, because this is the JSON view. You see the title. See the JSON view. So the JSON view is here, There's a route. It's very important because the route should be here. That's the value. This is in JSON. And then I'm using the main layout here. So if you click on this, you see here's the in JSON. So why is it in JSON? Because it here. That's the value. Once you come to this website, you will route it to this website and the value is in JSON. That's why you see the in JSON there. And that's the name of the file, which extends the main. And I'm using the frontend service. Here, this frontend service. That's how you can use dependency injection. Dependency injection is achieved with the add auto wire, right? That's how you can use dependency injection. And then here's the grid definition with JSON node. I'm using here JSON node. And here in the grid, I add the different columns to the grid. And that's how I can add the columns, the JSON node, right? So look at that. That's how I can put the different columns. I can add the different columns to the post grid. I call it post grid. And then I put the button there, which is the fetch button. And here, this is an important step because this determines what's happening if someone clicks on the button. It's very easy. Here, when you create the button, actually here you determine, you call the postgrid.setItems function, and then you pass in the service getAllPosts. And that's how you can get the different data from the backend, right? So let me check again. One step back. So calling a REST service using JSON for results, that's how you can get it. This function, the fetch posts, add theme variants, that's why this is a built-in standard layout of Vaadin. So that's how I add the built-in standard layout which exists in Vaadin. And in order for us to be able to see everything, we have to add, this is an important step. First, I add the fetch post button. That's why I can see here this right before the grid. The grid is below and the fetch all post is above because I added the button first and then I added the grid. That's why I can see the grid after that. So the button is here and the grid is below because we added in that order. But you could ask the question, okay, but why is it put below the button? Why not next to the button? It is because it's a vertical layout. How do I know that? I use the layout here. It's called main layout class, right? If you check this main layout, the main layout looks like this. What's happening in the main layout here? In the main layout, we define the different router links we want to use. Here are the router links and also the page title. And this is called main layout. So in the main layout, once these are declared, I mean the different variables, the router link variables are declared, I have to pass in the different values and the classes, like here, you see. So that's happening here, where the router links are, these are actually the creation of these router links. And then here I give them an initial value. So that's how I give them in the constructor, I give them an initial value. And after this, I have given them an initial value. I have to pass them in an unordered list. I pass them in another unordered list, you see. And once I pass them in an unordered list, then I create a navigation, and then I pass in the list into the navigation, and finally I add to the drawer. We call the drawer, this is the drawer, right? That's why you see that here. Okay, and then I set the drawer opened false. It can be open or it can be true or false. Okay, and here is the header part. This is the header part. And finally, the router links. Here, get the router links, return the new router link, and then you have to pass in all the router links right here. And finally, there is an after navigation. In the after navigation, you have to put all these things into the after navigation function in order for you to be able to make it work. That's important. It's an important part. So this is how the main layout looks like. Okay, but let's get back to this one. So we saw the home, we saw the main layout, and we saw the JSON view here. Okay, let's see the next one. So if we come back to home and we want to use calling a REST service using a DTO class for results, what's happening here? This is I called it website. Here I put all the 3 buttons with the table. So let's see how it works. So actually the way it works, it's easy as well, because here is the website. In the website, I give it a value. First Vaadin website with DTO. I use the main layout class. First Vaadin website with the DTO. Okay. So I just put the website here. That's the name of the class, which extends the main. I determine the different variables I'm using, and then the getters. You see, I get the different variables I declared here. I need those because I have to pass these values to the form. So you will see why. So then I create the constructor. Here's the constructor. I'm using the frontend service. So I have to auto wire. So this is the dependency injection. Then we create the grid here. We set the columns. We set the columns to ID, name, and address. And also we set the items. Service.getAllPost with DTO. We set the items in the grid. That's how we set that. Okay, selection mode is single. That means actually at a time you can select only one line, not more lines. If it's multiple, then you can set multiple lines. And here is the button, which is the fetch users button. Here's what it's doing. You see, it's a lambda function. With the lambda function, you can set the items in the grid. That's how you can do that. We have a new user. The new user is doing this. You can navigate to the form right here. Okay, that's how you can navigate to a form. And this is the built-in standard format, the layout. So I add to this button the built-in layout, and then I create the update user button. And finally, when somebody clicks on the delete button, here in the delete button, I am saying what to happen. Here, I call the service.delete functions in order for us to be able to delete, and then refresh the grid, and that line will disappear, which is deleted. And then I get the current page and then reload it, right? And of course the exception has to be handled, because here there can be an exception. And then actually I am using also the standard layout, adding to this button, And then finally, I have to add the new user button, the update user button, and the delete user button, and the grid to the page. That's how it can be seen. And then finally, I add a item click listener to the grid. Because what's happening here? Look, when I click on this line, and then I want to update it, yeah? So the page has to deliver this information, the 13, the Madonna, Panama, and the email address has to deliver to the form. So when I click on the update user, look, this information is already here. It was brought from the grid to here, and I'm doing this here. Okay, I add the click listener, add item click listener, and then I'm saying what should happen here. What should happen? I have to use the Vaadin session. I'm using session variables, setting these session variables, and with the help of these session variables, I will take over this information to the form. Okay, so that's what I'm doing right here. That's why it needs to be done, because this information should get over to the form. Okay, so actually that's all. I mean, that's all here in the website, what is important. And let's see how the form picks this up. What I'm setting here, let's see the form, how it picks that up. So if you click on the entry form view, the update form view, look, here is where we pick up the information. In the update, here I'm picking up the information I'm bringing over from the website Java. And then here in this form, I show you this is the form. Okay, the code of the form looks like this. I create a H3 title and different fields, text fields, and an error message also if there is an error. And the buttons I create, and I add the different layout to the buttons through this here. And then I add the form layout. I add all these elements. That's why I see everything on the screen. If I wouldn't do this, nothing could be seen. Right? This is a very important step here to add that. And then I do some settings, the set max width, and also the styling. That's how I can do the margin. And also I put some pixel sizes here, so you can see that, and also set the values here. That's why you can see the information here. I set the values. Look, here is where I set all these values. I got these values from the storage, from the session storage, and I am able to set them right here. And this is the formality, how it should look like. So you see, that's why it looks like this, because I set these things this way. So I put here 2 and not 3, for example. And also the error message is set here, for example, and also add the form layout to the page. Okay, and here the last step, which is very important, which is the binder. What do we use this binder for? The binder is for field validation, right? Here is where I create a binder, and the fields should be bound with the DTO's fields. Don't forget, here we have the DTO. Yeah, this DTO have fields: ID field, name field, address, email field. And here, the website, in the update form view, I must bind this data with the DTO fields. Okay, and here's where it's happening. And then finally, when I click on the button, I create a details bean, and this details bean with the binder.writeBean, I put the details bin in it, and with that I'm calling the service update with the details bin and how I can update that. And then I am showing the success message here, and then I navigate back to the other page, and of course handle all the exceptions which can happen. So that's how I handle the exceptions, and this is what the cancel button does. Actually, it's not a cancel button. I would rather call it a reset button, because I reset all these values to an empty string. So let's check. So if I put in cancel, you see all the data are gone, and then I should be, these are necessary fields, so I should fill up this data so that it works. That's important. Okay, so it's a reset button. It's not really a cancel button, because the cancel button redirects back you to the former side. And then here I am showing the success message. I'm showing the success message, and that's only a visibility validator, but I don't use this right here. So let me check. So if I say here Josh, and I say the address is, let's say Budapest, and the email is josh@yahoo.com, right? Okay, and I say update user. You see here is the message, and the Josh was updated. Okay, so that's how the update form works. The entry form is exactly the same. The only difference is we don't have any session variables here because that's a completely new user. So that's why I created two forms. I have an entry form and I have an update form. These are the same. The only difference is the session variables. But other than that, no difference. So it's exactly the same. Okay, so we checked almost everything. So let me get back to the home, and then we check this one, and we check the second one, the REST service using the DTO class for results. And now we check the asynchron one, this one, how it works. So the asynchron one, when we come here to the, which one is that? Let me check. So it's called the asynchron view. Yeah. In the asynchron view, not so many things happen, because we only view the data here. Manipulation like update or delete. We just fetch the comments. That's why not so many things happen here. But how can we do in an asynchronous way? We create the grid, and then we are using the service. What we do here is the dependency injection, and then we give a service the initial value, and basically here we use the DTO. We create a user grid DTO, and then finally we will fetch the data. So we create the button and add the standard layout to the button and create everything for the page. So we add to the page these things, and once it's happened, then we call the start fetch. The start fetch, we call it get all comment asynchronous, and in the results we get that. Actually, we get that, and that's all. That's how we do that. And I think we discussed everything, because here, okay, we had the asynchronous view. Let me get back to the home. So here we checked the asynchronous, and we checked also the form. So we checked everything. Okay, I hope you like this course, and you enjoyed that. I know Java is sometimes a little bit difficult for beginners, and probably Angular or React is a little bit easier, but I hope you could benefit from that, and you can use this in your life. Thank you very much for joining this course, And I hope you can write your own code in Java Vaadin and you'll be successful. Have a nice day. Bye bye.